Hello.
Hola.
So I had to run and put a jacket on because I realized I'm wearing an Anheuser-Busch shirt and an Anheuser-Busch hat. So I'm at least going to cover up the shirt and hopefully fins up. Nobody knows what that means.
Why don't you just put your hat to the back, Harry? It'd be super cool.
I know.
You're wearing sunglasses inside.
I mean, they're not sunglasses, Jen. They're blue blockers.
Right?
Okay.
Oh.
Get it right.
Oh.
So wearing a sport coat sitting in a lounger just doesn't really work out well. They're not compatible. All right. So I was just going to ask a broad question, Jen, of Eric, and then you can take over. But this ball deal, like I just started thinking about it. 5 truckloads of cans is there's a lot of beer. I mean, it's more than most of these breweries sell in a year. Buying and storing these cans is not a possibility. And like we said this morning, it could add significant costs. And so we had talked about, so I was on a podcast with Kelly Meyer at New Braunfels Brewing Company, which he sold under duress, I think, last year. And so his podcast is basically mulling over the debris field of he and others breweries. Most of them started around 2010 that got caught up in that fever at the time and never really, because here's the thing, and Jen and Jordan, I'd like to get your take on this. Because remember, this is 10 years ago. And if you kind of remember back at that time, you either had to be local or kind of national. And like the in-between was what sucked.
Founders of the world.
Yeah.
They were
founders, Bells, Brooklyn, Fat Tire. That was already shifting before COVID, but I think COVID, and I'm just telling you what I think, and then you tell me where I'm wrong. And then COVID accelerated to where now being big is being badass, and the bigger getting bigger, even within craft. And these 2010 class, the class of 2010 is got caught in the crosshairs, and that's the kind of that bleeding edge that those guys are. They're kind of packaging. They're kind of a restaurant, but they're kind of packaging.
Yeah.
Those are on the crosshairs because it's a capital intent. It's the worst of both worlds.
Anyone outside the top 50, obviously, that's not super local, has it the toughest. And like you said, we all thought that a bunch of breweries were going to close during COVID. They didn't, but maybe they will now.
And that's I'm going to include that tomorrow because the podcast just came out today, and Kelly talks about about how at the end of March a lot of craft brewers are going to go out of business because of the ELIC loan and the PPP loans and all of that are going to, and then this can thing.
Yeah.
I mean, like we've seen with
the can thing it's just like whiplash for these craft brewers because, all the tap rooms, they had to pivot to cans, and now they're going to have to pivot straight back to own premise. And I don't know if, that's going to be there like it was prior. So,
yeah,
I mean, it's just a lot of whiplash, just moving back and forth.
Especially if the brewer is a lot of messaging tied around environmentalism and being a good steward of the environment, because you could switch to wraps, but the deal you can't easily recycle a wrap can. So that's another issue. But anyway, tomorrow's issue we'll discuss that. So looks like we got Eric on the line. There's but Biscuit, wake up. We've got a guest. At least look like you're alive. Eric, is
Harry,
this you?
How are you? It is.
Good. How are you doing? Let's take a look at you.
Badly.
God, dog, you look younger and younger every time I see you.
I'm trying to stay young.
Are you Benjamin
trying to work
Button?
Against time.
Who's the actor? Paul Rudd always gets younger every year.
Paul Rudd.
Paul Rudd.
I know, rude.
Sorry.
Paul Rudd.
My advanced age is starting to show. Well, Eric, thank you for being on. You're on BeerNet Radio. Congratulations.
Thank you.
For you. But no, thanks for being on. And this is, of course, Eric Ottaway of Brooklyn Brewery. My name's Harry Shoemaker of Beer Business Daily. We've got Jenn Litz-Kirk, executive editor, on the line as well, and including editor Jordan Driggers is also on the line. And so I just wanted to start off, Eric, with a kind of a general question that we were actually just bantering about right before you got on, which is, if you look back at like 2010 compared to today and how different the craft landscape is, because you remember back then,
Yeah.
fear or thoughts on where we were then 10 years ago and where we are today in craft.
Well, look, I think in some ways the industry is basically like bifurcating, if you will, right? I mean, it has gone hyper local. Many elements have gone hyper local. If you look at, the 4,000 breweries added in the last 5 years, or whatever the exact number is, like, how many of those are really just tasting room models, right? I'd say the vast majority.
Right.
And so, I certainly call those hyper local. But when I say bifurcating, I think what you're having is basically on the high end. It's like, all right, well, what's next? Like, where do you go from there? And basically, the answer is you have to start looking for even bigger platforms to drive bigger efficiencies to keep kind of driving the business model, right? And you can slowly grow to get there, or you can try and join somebody else's platform or put together your own to get bigger scale to where the economics really start making sense. It's kind of getting stuck in the middle. That's sort of difficult, if you will, right?
Join a platform or be hyper local or go home.
Yeah, well, it's not necessarily or go home. I don't want to sound quite that dire,
or the
certainly,
consumer
but
may
there
tell
are
you
some
to go
people
home.
that are. Yeah, there are some people that are surviving in the middle, but I would say that sort of that middle is increasingly more difficult to survive in, because you're not really big enough to get the synergies of scale from a bigger brewery, and you're not really hyper local either.
Right.
So you're kind of stuck in the middle. And I've been actually pleasantly surprised at how few breweries have actually shut down during this pandemic, and I think a lot of it is a testament to the fact that so many of these businesses are hyper local, and because they're that small, they just don't have that much overhead. And because they're selling, mainly directly to the consumer, they're able to pivot and get to the consumer in different ways, cans out the front door rather than pints over the bar. But they largely were able to, I think, keep that model intact, and were able to survive, accordingly.
Right.
So, I think the two different models are working for different reasons, but it looks like they've both proven themselves to be, pretty resilient. I think it's the stuff in the middle that gets, a little more difficult.
All right.
Howdy.
So- Sorry. What an elegant transition. That's what we're good. That's what we're really good at here, Eric, on this podcast.
That's all right.
Elegant
That's all right.
transitions. We're known for our-
Freewheeling. Yep, that's how I like
We're
it.
known
I
for
appreciate
technical
I appreciate your
difficulties.
puppy there too. Is that a lab? What do you have
Yes.
next to you there?
This is Biscuit. She's my co-pilot. She also does our data analysis and security.
Well, I've got my two puppies next to me here, and hopefully they stay reasonably quiet and don't
No,
interrupt us too much. But we'll see.
I can see you reaching under there, giving a little scritchy scritch. I
Yep,
see what
yep,
you're doing
yep.
over there, Eric.
Yep, exactly. Gotta
Hey,
keep an eye and
Eric.
make sure they're not chewing up the carpet here. Jen, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. You're good. Yeah. So we touched base briefly last week, and like shifting gears just a little bit, obviously so much of the business that you guys do is in New York, right? You're Brooklyn Brewery after all. And by the way,
Yep,
I'm
yep.
shocked that Harry hasn't mentioned Peter Luger, because that's all he ever, like the first word out of Harry's mouth whenever he hears the word Brooklyn's Peter Luger. So points
I'm
to
so
you, Harry.
basic that way.
Hey, there's nothing wrong. Peter Luger is great. I've probably been to Peter Luger's 200 times in my lifetime, and which means 200 of exactly the same meal, because there really is only one meal at Peter
There's
Luger's,
only one.
but it never gets
And it's-
old.
Well,
It never gets old.
I spent a month there one time in an afternoon with Steve Hendy, and we got to the end, and it's classic. Steve, you're a customer of mine. I'm gonna pay for this 4-hour meal.
I know where the story's going. I know
You
where the
do.
story's
With the
going.
And I
dinosaur
pull out
hands,
my American
right?
Yep.
Express card,
And they
"We
laugh
don't-
at you.
It's cash only. I mean, who has that much cash? Well, you know who does? Steve Hendy does. God
You know,
No,
bless him.
Steve Hendy has a Peter Luger credit card. Is what Steve Hendy has.
Yeah, right. I'm sure
So-
they bill him at the end of every quarter.
Yep.
Good
Yep.
times.
Yep. No,
But all that
we have one of those. No, Peter Luger's is great. Next time you're in town, we'll have to hit it up again. So
nice.
I missed it during the pandemic for sure. My record, Harry, is 3 times in 1 week.
Well, I'm glad that your cholesterol and you've survived all of that. Well done.
You have to have incentives, right? You know, there's got to be a reason for living, you know. But all of that to say, New York City, right, is so much of your business.
Yeah.
And we were chatting about, you know, it's obviously not all the way back, but a lot of it has come back. Kind of describe for me what it's like there right now. You know, I think you said like 25% of retailers have closed, but international visitors are going to start back up again. So how are you guys doing amid all of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely sort of a long, slow recovery, right? Everybody was hoping for the V-shaped quick bounce back, but I think in some areas and maybe that happened, but it certainly did not happen in New York City. I think the latest stats I saw, office occupancy is up to like 30%, up to 30%. We were at 10 for a long time, right?
That sucks.
So, that's a big improvement, but we're still talking about 30%, right? International tourism is the borders are open again, but it's not like it was the dam didn't get the door didn't get lifted on the dam and it flooded in, but you're starting to see that trickle starting to happen, but we've got a long ways to go before we get back to the 60 plus million tourists that are coming to New York City every year. So definitely what we're seeing is every month steady improvement. Literally month by month. You see a few more accounts open. You see velocity at those accounts starting to increase. The types of accounts that are starting to open back up. I mean, anything that was in like that Midtown area was just dead. Anything that was around any of the venues was dead. But now you're starting to see those places starting to reopen and get a little business. So it's literally like a day at a time, an account at a time, a week at a time as things gradually improve. Obviously we're excited to have international tourists coming back. That's it's a huge part of our business. It's a huge part of our tasting room business. Well over probably 60% of our visitors to the tasting room were international tourists. So we're happy to start seeing some of those people back. But it's going to take a while. I mean, everything I've read, people are expecting it's going to be 2-3 years to get that full international tourism back. Same thing with offices. It's kind of, originally it was going to be September when things reopened, as everybody was expecting back to school and, families coming back in and people come back to the office, and then Delta hit. So all those plans got thrown out the window. Now we're the latest pivot was, all right, we'll wait till the new year. Come January, we'll expect everybody back. Now you're starting to see a little bit of increase again in the numbers, and people are starting to hedge already and say, well, maybe we'll wait to the spring. So, it's a work in progress is the honest answer. And, I wish I had a crystal ball that could tell me exactly when the numbers would be at what. But there's no way of knowing for sure. So what we do is we budget ultra conservatively and then just be happy. It's better to be surprised on the upside than be surprised on the downside right now.
Yeah.
So that's how we're taking it. But the good news that we are sitting that, slow, steady progression. We're just not seeing any like rapid bounce back to pre-COVID numbers. That's just going to take time as a reality. But whether that's 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, that's anybody's guess.
Especially with Europe going back into lockdown. I mean, I think international.
Parts of Europe. Fortunately, the parts of Europe that we do most of our business in haven't gone back into lockdown. But who knows? I'm hopeful, but I'm also not naive that it certainly couldn't happen again. We have a number of markets in Europe that had some pretty hard lockdowns, like France and other places that are up nicely over their 2019 numbers now. So have bounced back pretty well, and so that's great to see. And here's hoping that they don't have to go back into lockdowns, and we can get back to that nice growth. Other markets, are struggling a bit more. So it really is market by market, case by case. So
And to that point, I remember there was a time where maybe slightly more than half your business was international. What's that at now? And how much is New York of your business? I mean, between those two places, that's got to be the majority of your business, right?
Yeah, I mean, international is probably 60%. New York's another 25, and everything else is 15.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah.
Interesting. And then when we were
Yeah.
chatting in May, I mean, I know you said it's doing this, but I have a quote from you and it was like, we're up stupid numbers right now, right? But of course,
Yeah,
comps are tough.
we were down stupid numbers and we're up stupid numbers,
Right.
right? And if you look at April of last year, we were down 70% in April. Right. So then when you sort of lap that and then you're up some stupid number and it's
Right.
like, but it's meaningless, right? That's why I sort of, I said that we were down stupid numbers. Now we're up stupid numbers. Point being that they're all sort of meaningless, right? So, but I mean, we're, if you look at how our year has progressed, I mean, the first quarter, we were still down pretty substantially because we were, not lapping COVID numbers yet, right? The first quarter of last year, we were still sort of pre-COVID. Kind of the proverbial shit hit the fan in March, kind of mid to late March. So up until then, things were going pretty well. So we started off the year this year still down, big numbers, and then we sort of as the year's gone on, we've recovered more and more and more. So we're back finally into the black for the year as a whole. We're now in the mid single digits, and hopefully we end up the year maybe low double digits. But if you look at kind of every quarter, every month going, it's just getting stronger and stronger and stronger, particularly in New York City.
Nice.
So, we're now trending in the mid to high 20s, and every number just every month's getting a little bit higher. So
awesome. So what's driving that? Because I know you guys, obviously we were just talking about some of the old school, big craft brewers. So you've got your legacy brands, right? Like your lager and everything, but then you're also big now in the last couple of years into non-alc, and you've got your hazy and stuff. So where are you guys placing your big bets in terms of what you're focusing on with what kinds of beer right now?
Yeah, I mean, we used to not be an IPA brewery almost at all, right? It was Brooklyn lager and a lot of seasonals, but we did have an IPA, but it wasn't a big part of our portfolio, and that's been one of our sort of big pivots over the last couple of years is participating a lot more in that segment, which is, as the biggest segment in craft. So IPA went from being 5% of our business to being more like 25% of our business. And hazy IPA, even though we were sort of a late entrant to that segment, is actually one of our biggest sort of new brand launches we've had in years. So that's
pulp, right?
It's
the pulp.
Sorry, yeah. Pulp art hazy IPA,
Yeah.
exactly. And so that's now our number 2 year-round brand after lager. Now it's still got a ways to go to catch up to lager, but it's growing very nicely, and so we're doubling down on that franchise and releasing a double IPA under that same name. Also a hazy IPA. So fueling that, continuing to fuel that fire, and we'll see where that franchise goes, but it seems like it's got good legs. Similarly, the non-alcoholic has been a great story for us, and that continues to grow nicely. We launched the second SKU with the IPA, and that actually seemed to reinforce the amber lager, and then we just released a variety pack that's just starting to hit the market right now. So we'll continue doing more in that area for sure on a global basis. So both the hazy, the pulp art franchise, and the special effects franchise are ones that we'll be continuing to focus on as we go forward.
Right, the special effects.
Yeah, while we're seeing starting to see some nice recovery in lager. So much of our lager numbers were driven by draft, and those were like at zero for a while. Now that's coming back, fairly steadily, but still got a ways to go there. But we're at least on the positive side of the ledger rather than the negative side of the ledger. So, and the other thing that happened during COVID, we were also such an on-premise focused brand. I mean, literally 60% plus of our business in New York City was on premise, and it was probably closer to 40% in a lot of our other markets. So with COVID, it sort of forced us to pivot and focus on developing that off-premise segment for us. And you don't do that overnight, but we're starting to see some good traction there and starting to get some momentum in that area. So the off-premise is becoming a bigger part of our market than it was before.
Mm-hmm.
So
How about
The other thing
beyond?
we've done is really pivoted, like a lot of brands, a lot more into cans.
Right. Right. Oh,
You know,
wow.
ironically, we were one of the very first ones to come out with a can with Brooklyn Lager that we did for golf courses and stadiums and things like that. But New York was such a big bottle market that we never focused a whole lot on cans other than that. And it's really in the last 2 years that we've started pivoting a lot more towards can. And so now cans are almost equal to bottles for us.
So with this fall news, is that going to affect you guys, or are you insulated?
No, fortunately, we're in good shape there. We,
Okay.
we, as you know, we do most of our U.S. production is done up at FX Mat in Utica,
Right. Okay.
and we have, just all the news you guys wrote on. We have a stake in FX Mat, so we're great partners there, and they have a great relationship with Ball, and contracted volumes and all that. So it looks like we'll be inside that wall, so to speak, but remains to be seen as we go forward. We're cautiously optimistic, let's put it that way.
That's the
But
phrase.
even so, I mean, we're still, everybody, even with contracts, has still been affected by if you have something that takes off on you, well, tough, because if you don't have the contracted volume, it's not like they've got extra cans sitting around. So you have to sort of be pretty careful about your supply chain when it comes to that. And then of course, lead times are way backed up, right? If you want to introduce a new product, you're looking at 6 months to get a new, package out the door. So that's just, whereas before it was closer to 60 days. So that really changes your whole planning horizon, right?
Does that make you look more at bottles again, or, any alternative packages, or no, that's just the reality?
I mean, put it this way, for now, it's where the consumer is still looking more at cans than they are at bottles. So, we still do both. Like I said, they're about equal for us. Whereas, there used to be cans used to be like 5% of our business. Now it's more like 30% of our business. We still do bottles, and in certain areas, those still do really well for us. Much stronger in the city than they are in other areas. But it is good having, sort of a foot in both worlds for sure.
Right,
So.
right. Cool. And then, speaking of FX Mat, your partner, they do a lot of Beyond Beer. Are you guys looking at any Beyond Beer beyond the Beyond Beer that you already do, like special effects, anything else that's a little more less beer and more beyond?
We are looking at a lot of Beyond Beer stuff. It's probably, I'd say half of our R&D work right now is looking at Beyond Beer, whether it's stuff that we're doing ourselves or through some other partnerships. Nothing that I can announce just yet, but yeah, we have a couple things that are going to be coming out in the spring that are way beyond beer, that we're super excited about. So I think there's sort of dabbling on the edges of Beyond Beer, and then there's kind of stepping way outside, and we're looking at some stuff that steps kind of way outside the boundaries, that we're really excited about. So there'll be more to come on that at the appropriate time.
Awesome. Well, thanks. Cool.
Yeah.
We'll be looking out. Which is one more for me, and then I'll
But
pass.
I mean, you're bringing up a great point, which is that, I think that's sort of the world that we're living in now, right? Is that it's very hard to be just a pure play anymore, right? Consumers pivoted in many ways. The consumer doesn't even know or care what they're drinking, and in the sense of how it's made or what category it fits into. They just want it to be convenient and fun. And they're sort of, they don't care about the tax designation or anything else. They just know whether they like it and it's exciting or not. And so I think we have to really sort of take the traditional way of thinking of like, well, what category does this fit in, and sort of forget about that, and just think more about what's exciting to the consumer and convenient, at the right price point. And forget about what category the rest fits into.
Right. No, I mean,
Because that's not how the consumer's thinking.
right. Harry,
Yeah,
you agree?
Have you observed, and again, let me just tell you what I've observed, and Eric, if you agree or disagree, especially among the younger cohort, LDA, they don't care as much about backstory and origin story I find is because they mostly think it's bullshit anyway. And so it's more about, like you just said, convenience. I like the beer. Is it, does it fit this occasion perfectly? Is that what you're seeing or no?
I think in a lot of the beyond beer categories, I think that's very true. Like, I don't think anybody is looking for their hard tea or their spiked seltzer to like fulfill their whatever ESD, feelings, right? But on the other hand, I think I think it's almost like either or. It's like either it's it's a little bit like that bifurcation I was saying earlier. I think there's a similar bifurcation, right? It's either you don't care at all and it's irrelevant to you, it's just fun or not fun, and that's all they care about, or
Right.
they care a lot, and you really have to go deep on the backstory, the support, and being genuine with what you're doing, not just kind of paying lip service to it.
And it's not,
So
it's not mutually exclusive, right? Because the same kids that are holding an iPhone, that's the epitome of corporate greed, also really also care about, like you said, environmental and
climate change,
socialism.
sustainability,
Yeah,
recycling, all those things.
right.
Absolutely.
And they deeply care about that. But if it's a fun occasion, who cares? I want a blue screen on my messaging. It's
Right.
it's a weird dynamic bifurcation, like you said. So,
Yes, exactly. So I think
And so-
there are times when it matters and times, excuse me, one second, times when it doesn't.
yeah.
And I think it is a bit of a weird dynamic, right? So
Yeah.
I think people, there are times, a time and a place when that is really important to people, and there's a time and a place when it's just irrelevant,
Right.
and they don't even see it as a contradiction.
Right. Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I
So
love that about Gen Z. Actually, I love I love they're my favorite generation by far. Nobody hates them more than millennials, by the way. Have you noticed that? Millennials are just dogging him bad. And I'm like, guys, y'all complained when my generation dogged on you, and now you're dogging them even worse. And I think millennials are great, but I always defended them, but I think Gen Y is the shits and the tits. And let me tell you why. They don't give a shit about all the mores and bullshit that we have created over the last 200 years in our society. And they just want to rip it all down, which every generation kind of does. Right. But God bless them. Let's do it. Let's make it a better place, And
yeah, well, I mean, when you say they don't give a shit about sort of the mores and all that, I might disagree with you a little bit on that. But I take your broader point, which is that they're definitely not stuck in sort of prior conventions, right? And they're re-looking at how we define everything and all that. I mean, and in many ways, they're almost like beyond sort of the soul searching around a lot of these issues. It's like it's the only thing they know. It's just normal, right? So take LGBTQ issues or all the gender issues, et cetera. Like they all go to school with people that are this, that, like whatever, mix something like, and they don't care. They don't need to
Right.
label it. They don't need to make a big deal about it. It just is. Like it's like, oh yeah, of course. Like, of course.
That's a great way to.
They've got a
Yeah.
this mom and a that dad, or two moms or two dads, or a trans this. Like it didn't phase them. It's just not a topic. It's not a big deal. It's like,
Right.
what's
Right.
everybody else making
Yeah.
a big deal about? Like
Right.
this is just normal.
Well, if we wanted to
So-
simplify it and like generalize, like millennials, like you just did soul searching, whereas with Gen Z, it's just not even it's just like, this is our life. And
Right.
why is everybody even talking about it? So
Exactly.
yeah, it's
like what's all the
very
fuss
different.
about? Like why do you care? Like they just let
Right.
them, just they are who they are. Let them be. Like who cares? Like
Yeah.
So,
Very interesting. I'm fascinated by the generational thing, as Jen and Jordan know, because I think because we spent 10 years trying to figure out millennials, and then when we decided finally that we'd figured them out, then they weren't relevant anymore. So now we're going to spend the next 10 years talking about Gen Z until they're not relevant once we figure them
I
out.
think you're just jealous because everybody used to shit on Gen X and now you're trying to avenge yourself.
Yeah, they're not relevant to you, Harry.
No, I think honestly, I think Gen X was the only generation that nobody shits on.
That's
Like,
not true. Back in the 90s, everything was Gen X and they're
grunge.
all grunge.
Yeah,
and
we
they're
all wore grunge and we did
They all want to kill
whatever.
themselves. That's what all their music's about, right?
Right. Yeah, Kurt Cobain and all that. But what I'm saying is that it's all okay, boomer, and then fucking millennials are ruining everything. Books, thanks millennials. No more books and no more
More books.
no more cafeterias, lubies, furs, gone. Thanks millennials. But now, I mean, I witness my own sons who are in their early 20s shitting on Gen Zs. Like, they're terrible. They're terrible. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's just we're getting way off topic and we're keeping Eric too long. We can talk about this shit on another podcast.
Oh, absolutely.
But sorry, go ahead.
Jordan,
Jordan,
I mean, you're bringing up a great point, which is, I mean, it's sort of, at a very sort of macro level, like how is that, affecting, all these different trends that we're talking about, right? And I think, to our point about the, consumer, a whole segment of the consumer base really not caring how to define it or what it's the exact same thing we were talking about. Like, things just are, like, they don't have to have a definition or that may be made a big deal about what category they fit into or everything else. They just are. So if it's fun and convenient, that's all they care about,
Right.
So
Right.
Yeah.
if they like hanging out with the person, they don't care what title or what combination or what anything else. It's irrelevant, right? They just like them or they don't. So
maybe there's hope for the future, Speaking of the future, I just have one more. I have to ask, of course, where you guys fit in, and this is getting 180 back on topic. Where do you guys fit in Kirin's strategy, right? I have to ask, with the Big Bells news last week, I know they own, 24.5% of you guys. When they make a move, do you guys get a say? Does it affect you? Anything you can share? Or
Lion is, they're basically running all this stuff they're doing in the US, New Belgium, and Bells is through their Australian division. So it's really a completely separate strategy.
It is a completely separate.
Australia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Interesting. Okay.
So I mean, that company's so big that it's really not one company. I mean, you could deal with completely different people. Am I right there?
Oh, 100%. I mean, it's like it's dealing with completely different countries, not just different people.
Right.
So,
different continents. Or, I mean, Australia is not a continent. Yeah. I do know that. My mother would be mortified if she heard that. But yeah, interesting.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, Jordan.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's no easy transition after all the generational talk, but when you were talking about pivots earlier, I didn't hear you say this, but one area that I was wondering if y'all started to place larger focus on is just convenience and single serves. Has that been a larger area of focus for y'all over the past?
Yeah, we actually launched our first 19.2s about halfway through this year, and that'll be a big area of focus for us next year. So we'll have a total of four different 19.2s in the market.
Okay.
So we'll have lager, maybe five. We'll have lager, we'll have Paul Part Hazy IPA, we'll have summer ale, we'll have one of our hard seltzers is going to be in 19.2. So absolutely, we're seeing more and more call for that, and so FX Mat installed some new equipment earlier this year that finally allowed us to get into that package. So we're definitely jumping on that.
Got it.
Yeah.
That's all I had.
Well,
yeah, the other thing we're looking at, sort of when you're talking about convenience, and this is a whole nother sort of topic, if you will, that we could touch on it, and you cut me off and we can save it for another day or whatever you want, but is the whole kind of route to market question, right? I mean, COVID trends on a macro level, again, sort of e-commerce and direct to consumer exploded. Of course, in the beer industry, in certain areas, a lot of states, put in rules or loosened rules to allow, more, breweries and players to go direct to consumer. And some of those are permanent, some of them are being ratcheted back. And then we're seeing the development of, the Drizzlies and the mini bars and all these other models that are sort of pseudo direct to consumer, right? Because they're still going through the 3-tier system, but they're providing that sort of direct to consumer interface, if you will. And I think that's a whole nother area that I think is going to continue to develop and play a bigger and bigger part of the beer industry going forward.
And how does that play out? Because we're really talking about two different things. And one is, shipping direct to the consumer using a common carrier. And then the other is, like you said, using like Drizzly or Instacart, where it goes through the 3-tier system. So that, two different strategies, two different really routes to market, same kind of end result. Are you participating in both of those?
We are participating. I mean, certainly with the Drizzlies and all that, we're participating.
Yeah.
Right? So we're doing more than we ever have in that area. I'd be lying if I said it's a huge percentage of our business, but we're definitely engaged there in a way we weren't before. The other sort of the real direct to consumer, if you will, to me, I think is an interesting one, because I actually see it as sort of a win-win in today's distributor model, right? Distributors increasingly, and as they have for a while, and it's taken, I think, took another leap forward during COVID, don't want to deal with a long tail of brands, right? They've got too many suppliers, they got too many SKUs, and they're looking for ways to rationalize and simplify. At the same time, a lot of that direct to consumer, a lot of those smaller kind of, releases and all that are important for a lot of breweries to do their brand building, right? It's not where they're making their money, but it's an important part of their marketing and their brand building. So I think in some ways there's a win-win by sort of allowing breweries to do more of that direct to consumer for the stuff around the fringes, while freeing up the distributor's warehouse and the headache for their salespeople and their accounting team and everything else of dealing with these, small releases.
Right.
So it's almost similar, like, I think the common theme of this podcast is going to be bifurcations, right? I think it's almost like a bifurcation where, like, your bigger volume, higher volume SKUs, that's going to go through the 3-tier system. And then your smaller SKUs are going to go through more of a direct to consumer channel. And everybody's going to be better off for it.
I think that's a great point, that it is a win-win. And I think distributors as a whole are starting to come around to that understanding, particularly the more, I would say, sophisticated ones, but it is still an uphill battle, because there are distributors who, they have that camel nose under the tent mentality or slippery slope. If you allow this, then it's going to go to that and that and that, and so it is an education process where this is not even 0.0001% of your volume, nor is it ever going to be, because beer is what is beer? It's heavy. Thank you, Jordan. It's heavy relative to its price. So it's never going to be a huge DTC product. I don't care what you say. Wine is different. High-end spirits are different. If you're going to sell an $80 bottle, then yes, ship it. But other than that, it's just for taste, right?
Yeah.
Am I right?
Well, and absolutely, and also think that distributors increasingly, as they should and need to, are themselves looking at beyond beer, right? And blurring the lines and crossing categories themselves. So as they continue to make their businesses more complex, in that not they're not purposely trying to make it more complex, but by default, as they cross into more categories, it becomes more complex. They need to find ways to simplify each of those categories, right? So one of the ways you sort of free up room in your warehouse and free up kind of mental space and accounting space and everything else is by sort of trimming some of that long tail and allowing distributor or breweries to just handle that directly in whatever fashion they want to do it, and free up room for you to focus on other kind of bigger trends in new categories.
Do y'all do any direct shipping of your non-alc beers? Is that an opportunity?
Yeah, we do.
Okay.
We do. It's probably maybe 5% of the volume, maybe even less. It's not a big amount, but we are doing some direct shipment.
Okay.
Well, cool. Well, thank you, Eric. I mean, there's hundreds of other questions. We could stay here all day, but as you can see, my dog needs his beauty rest, and very important. And but thanks for being
I can
on,
see I
honest.
bored your dog to tears with this
Well, no,
conversation. So
Well, I have headphones on, so she cannot. We don't allow her to listen in on the podcast. She might get too
okay,
excited.
so she might reveal secrets to other
Right.
people.
To our competitors. I
Right.
mean, she has a notoriously blabbermouth over here. Well, thanks for being on, Eric, and I appreciate it. Thanks for drinking beer.
Absolutely.
And,
Next time you guys are all up, sounds like we got a Peter Luger trip in our future.
Damn right. Damn right. More butter, the better. And I'll bring some cash this time.
Sounds good. All right.
All right, man. Take care.
Thanks,
Be
Eric.
well.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.